I'm Sosteen. Welcome to my channel. Today we're going to talk about making a pair of 18th century court breeches. By court breeches, I mean the fancy kind that you see in court suits like this one, with the embroidered buttons in the front and embroidered belts around the legs, the fall front, and all made out of fine silk. It will be fall front, meaning that the breech is closed by 3 buttons at the waistband and then having a portion of fall that covers the front bit with 2 other buttons. This one will have 2 buttons, one at each side to close up each side pocket, as well as a third pocket at the waistband for a watch. While I will be endeavoring to make these breeches very fancy and respectful for any 18th century gathering, please note that none of my methods are historically accurate. Today I'll be using the J.P. Ryan fall front breeches pattern. It's a pattern I've used many times before and I like how it works out. The directions for this pattern, while sometimes confusing, result in something that really does make a nice end project. My suggestion is that the first time you do this, you really just do every step in the book as written, step by step. Then as you do this more and more, feel free to edit the steps as you need to, but that first time, it really helps having a guide. While I mostly followed the instructions as written, I did modify the actual pattern pieces a lot. Very obviously, you'll notice that my pattern has duct tape on it. This is because my husband's thighs are wider from years of crew than the original pattern by about 1.5 inches. So I went and cut out the pattern and extended the leg width by about 1.5 inches and duct taped it on the front and stuck some paper in the back to even it out. You'll notice that the pattern pieces are all sized for the individual size, and that's a J.P. Ryan special. Just be sure to measure yourself appropriately before ordering any of her patterns. I also changed up the back of the pants. One thing about the back pattern of 18th century breeches, they are roomy in the back. Here I'm showing my hot pink frock coat, cute from the front, very diaper buddy in the back. So after living with diaper butt for my first 2 pairs of breeches, I did edit the pattern for my latter pairs by cutting off about 4 inches off the top and 4 inches off the middle seam of my patterns. You may have to take off more or less depending on what size you are making. The one pattern piece I will not be using from the pattern is the knee band. These have a slight curve to them, which is really annoying to digitize, and moreover, not as common as straight knee bands to the best of my knowledge. To prove it, I'm showing this gorgeous embroidered silk panel from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. You can see how the panels have been embroidered but not cut, and here the breeches leg belts are completely straight. For that reason, mine are too. So just as an aside, these court suits were not made by one person. These court suits were usually made by a whole shop of embroiderers who all worked together on one coat for several months. They would stretch these silk pieces out on large wooden embroidery frames, and the embroiderers would spend hundreds of hours making these panels. Many people would work on one court suit at a time, and I can't imagine they were paid particularly well to do it. These panels would then be bought up by rich customers, who would then have the pieces cut out to their measurements. A few of these completed panels have survived uncut, and the one shown in this video has been linked below. The Metropolitan Museum of Art allows you to get really close to both the front and the back of these panels online, so please take a look. It's really a thing to marvel at. So let's get started. Here, let's cut out the fabric. I'm using a beautiful blue silk and cotton blended brocade from Sartor. They're a historical reproduction company who make absolutely stunning pieces. This particular fabric is from the 15th century, so it's not really accurate to the time period I'm aiming for. The original court suit had a tiny blue and black stripe, but since I couldn't find anything similar, I decided to go the other way completely and just pick something that my husband loved. You'll notice I'm using a little plastic macaroon to hold the pieces down while I trace with chalk before cutting it out. Those are a gift from my friend AJ, and I've linked the tutorial down below for anyone else who wants to make them. Now, while this brocade fabric is quite thick, I still chose to flatline it to give it more strength. Furthermore, since the pants will be unlined, I want to have something to protect the silk from sweat. To flatline, I matched the wrong side of the silk to the cotton poplin I chose to line it with. Then I sewed the two together about 1/2 inch away from the edge. I chose to use a bright white thread so that if I did end up sewing over the flatlining, I could pick out my stitches really easily since they would be visible. I did this for all the pieces except for any pieces I knew would be lining pieces. I did have to fix a laziness mistake. When cutting out the flat lining in cotton poplin, I noticed it was a little wrinkly but chose to cut it out first, and then iron it. This resulted in a flat line that was slightly larger than the original, so I decided to trim it at this time. Don't be me, iron fabrics before you cut the pieces out. After this was done, I started on the waistband. The waistband is supposed to be inner lined. I chose a strong cotton twill for this purpose instead of my thin cotton poplin. The original pattern has a pocket watch pocket on the right side, so I chose to add this too. To do this, I marked where the welt pocket would go. On the cotton pocket, I copied out the thin rectangle for the hole in the pocket. I pinned this rectangle where the pocket would be to the right side of the fabric. It's a little weird if you've never done it before. You then carefully stitch the rectangle. Then using a very sharp blade, I cut the center line of the welt pocket and 4 tiny incisions extending to the 4 corners of the rectangle. By stuffing the edges of the white pocket into the incision, this will turn around and in turn make a very clean pocket. It's pretty exciting to see it work every single time. Iron it down at this point. I then sewed the 3 edges of the pocket closed. However, the opening needs to be hidden, so I got the welt pocket piece pre-sewn by me and sewed it down along the top. I then turned it over and closed the edges by hand. After this, there's a lot of random pieces that need to be prepared in order to make the final. I won't go into this, but if you do buy the pattern and try this, just be sure to go ahead and look at all of them and get them ready before starting the breeches proper. It helps keep the momentum going later. Now let's start on the breeches proper. I start with one of the breeches front pieces and I add the fall front extension. I use the original pattern to copy out the placement line, then place and pin the fall front extension piece. I sewed this down with a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance, being sure to reinforce the bottom of the seam. Then I carefully cut out the line that I have drawn earlier, stopping at my dot. I use frayed check to clean up the edges. Since the seam allowance is so small, I don't want this area to get frayed and weak over time. Note that when I use frayed check, I don't cut open the top. Rather, I pull off the top and use an old paintbrush to paint the edges so that they don't end up with weird splotches, since frayed check will change the color and quality of any fabric. Once these are dry, I need to add the inside pants portion. This portion exists solely so that when the fly front does go up, there is a portion inside that is keeping the shirt fabric and genitals inside of the garment. Remember, there are only 2 buttons on the top keeping the fly front up, so this does help secure everything. To do so, I iron the raw edges that I just fray checked as little as possible. I put the pattern piece inside and line it up to how I've drawn it. I top stitch this down, being very careful to reinforce the bottom that gets the most stress. Now the tricky part, adding the pocket. It took me 4 tries to understand the 2 side pockets, mostly because her pattern piece does not align properly to the actual breeches front. She actually says trim this away without explaining that it won't fit, so it's confusing. I get the unlined pocket piece and line it up to the side of the pants and the top edge corner and pin them right side to right side. I trim away the portion that doesn't line up and I sew along the top of the pocket as well as a few inches of the side to the marked dot. Then I trim it and iron it right side out. You can see it here. Remember that this pocket will be closed with a button that goes all the way up to the waistband, keeping it secure. Then I get the portion of the pocket that has been flatlined, put that right side out, and sew the two pockets together along the sides. Now I have 3 pockets on these pants, 2 on the front and 1 at the waist. This is the point where I sew the front seam of the pants together and iron it out. Now it's really starting to look like a fall front pair of breeches. Now's the time to clean up the fall front. I get the lining for the fall front that I had made earlier in the step that I didn't show and pin it to the fall front portion of the breeches. I machine sew the 2 layers together, trim it, turn it right side out, iron it, and there you have it, the fall front portion of the breeches. Now let's start on the back. This is the pant leg, this is the seat, so your butt crack goes here, this is the side of your leg. So these 2 pieces have to be sewn together so that it can actually make a pair of pants like this. So that part's going to get sewn together. I've already gone ahead and hemmed this piece right here and sewn it on. This will be turned inside out, and that makes a place for the buttons to go onto and the buttons to actually sit in. So that's happening there, but meanwhile, let's get this seam together right there. Once the back is sewn together, sew the legs and the sides of the pants together and iron it open. I then took this time to whip stitch the fall front lining down to the lining of the crotch. This keeps everything flat inside as well as comfortable. Then I added the waistband that I had pre-prepared off screen. To do this, I trimmed the tops of the pockets in the front so that it would line up to the front extensions. I gathered the back of the seat of the pants to fit the rest of the waistband. I pinned this to the bottom of the waistband and sewed this together on the machine. Afterwards, I ironed the breeches so that the seam could be tucked into the waistband. I used a whip stitch to sew everything down. Meanwhile, the bottoms near the knees were cleaned up by sewing things on and turning them inside out. I didn't really go into it in this video since that part can be followed from the instructions on the pattern. I will talk about the embroidered breeches knee straps though. After the knee straps were embroidered, I cut them out and ironed them so that the borders were clean on all sides. I used 3/8 inch iron-on hem tape by Heat and Bond to glue all the sides down. I made a matching reverse side of the same shape by cutting out the same pattern and ironing to the same size. I pinned this together wrong side to wrong side and whip stitched the 2 together on all sides but the one that would be attaching to the bottom of the leg. And I do these parts by hand so that I can be sure that no stitches bother the embroidery and I have more control of the design by the embroidery. I left the side that would be attaching to the bottom of the leg open. I tucked the edge of the breeches leg into the pocket that is formed by the knee band strap, pinned it together, and then slip stitched this all closed. I did that for the other side as well. I have another video on how to make embroidered buttons. I'll link that at the end, but for now, here are the 9 embroidered buttons that I made for the pants. I made 7 for the breeches and an extra 2 to keep in storage should these 2 ever fall off. Finally, I machine sewed the buttonholes and used the buttonhole tool to cut them open. I sewed on the buckles onto the legs. These are from Burnley and Trowbridge, and I highly recommend them. They're absolutely gorgeous, and she has a very large selection. Now, most people don't sew on their buckles, but I do that because it works best for the person wearing them, and my husband has a tendency to knock them off. I then put in the modesty panel in the back as well as 6 eyelet holes for lacing. To finish, I sewed on all 15 buttons, 7 embroidered ones and 8 unembroidered ones. And there you go, a finished pair of 18th century court breeches. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this, please be sure to subscribe to my channel. I'll be going into other 18th century goodies such as fichus, frock coats, and waistcoats. Happy embroidery, guys!